What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Floyd Street's Finest. I'm your host, Jeff Greer. As always, I highly recommend that you go out and listen to all of the Field of 68 Media Network podcasts, of which we are members and partners. Certainly lots of national stuff out there, but a lot of great team podcasts as well. And if you can, please make sure you go over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. We got another great episode for you all today, and we're going to dive right into it. I am joined by my friend here, Dominique Yates, better known as Big Dom in these parts. Dom, what's going on, man? How are you?
Doing great. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right. It's awful outside, but you know what? We're surviving. Something that I always want to do before we dive into obviously the things that we talk about and think about professionally is just kind of getting your backstory. So how did you end up here in Louisville? I know you're a Bowling Green guy, a Western Kentucky guy, but what's your story here that you ended up coming up here and working in media up here?
Sure. Of course, it's always a pleasure to do the show with you. You know, you're one of my favorites, Jeff, so I appreciate you having me on, my man. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a country boy through and through, born and raised in Muhlenberg County, paradise, as I like to call it, and went through high school, and that was when I first discovered broadcasting and kind of just developed a love for it my junior year of high school. Went to college at Western Kentucky, and when I was there, starting my freshman year, I started part-time the TV station there, WLKY, everything from editor, shot football on the weekends, and earned an opportunity on air. And I was there for 7 years in Bowling Green, and then transitioned to Louisville about 5 years ago now. Was at the Courier-Journal, a place you know well. We're both two former CJ guys, and did a little multimedia there for 4 years. And then I was contacted for an opportunity at WLKY, and I guess about 3 years ago, I just reached a year here. So it's been a fun journey. And yeah, that's how I was getting to know people like you. So that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years here in Louisville.
I love it. Well, and you know, I think like something that I tried really hard to do, Dom, when I moved here is like, I've always been a big college basketball guy. So I understood what I was not getting into, but necessarily understood the history. I obviously didn't live the history, which I think is a very different thing. And we could talk about that from your experience growing up in the state. But it's hard for people who come from outside of the state to truly understand everything and really be able to live the experience until you just get some time. And my first true, like, okay, this is different experience happened pretty quickly. It was only a few months in to my job at the Courier-Journal. Louisville, I don't want to bring up a bad memory for Louisville fans, but it was the Sweet 16 game against Kentucky the year after the national championship for Louisville. Obviously a team that was criminally underseeded in the NCAA tournament, should not have been a 4 seed to start with. But walking down the street and just being around the city in the few days leading up to that game between those teams, because it's a Sweet 16 game. So they had a few days between that matchup. And that was truly when it really hit me. There were other things in the first like 4 or 5 months, but that was when it truly hit me. Like, this is different. So I'm curious from your standpoint, growing up here, what was your like Louisville, Kentucky, and just college basketball in general education like? What was the family situation like in terms of just how you learned about all of this and kind of grew up with it?
Well, yeah, that's the unique thing because, yeah, being from Western Kentucky, it's heavy basketball. And in Muhlenberg County, it's heavy UK. Like, there's a lot of Wildcats there. It's a heavy Wildcat fan base, and it's actually been fascinating when the tornadoes hit Western Kentucky and John Calipari and some of the players were in town. I told Cal I'm from Muhlenberg, and even he knew, like, oh yeah, not only did they get hit with the tornadoes, but it's a big fan base. But my family, a lot of them are originally from Louisville. My brother graduated from UofL. My dad's from here. My mom spent some time up here, so I have family a little bit of everywhere. That Louisville, Kentucky fan. So even at a young age, I knew like it was a big deal. Like, as a young kid, I don't even think I knew who like the governor of Kentucky was, but I knew who Rick Pitino was and like Denny Crump. You know, like that was what it was like as a kid. and that was basketball here. So even as a guy like I've been doing this for a while now, but even still being from this state, I have like those moments like, okay, this is pretty cool. Like, am I in Denny Crumb's house right now looking at memorabilia? Like,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Am I talking to Daryl Griffith? Like, just little small stories like when my dad lived here in the 80s, he tried to grow up mini pro thinking he was Daryl Griffith. And I'm like hanging out with these type of people and, watching the 2013 team. And now I know Russ and I've enjoyed his bourbon and talked to Peyton Siegler. So yeah, it's a lot of really cool, unique things. Not only being from the state, but then getting to cover it. Going to Rupp and being even at Freedom Hall with that history and so many good coaches and players. So yeah, it is. It's a really cool, unique thing. But from the moment I was born, I knew basketball in this state was a big deal.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I was going to ask you something that I never really had to experience when I was doing. So obviously now, like, I have a day job that is very different than Louisville and Kentucky stuff. It's all soccer related. And so I'm like more of a part-timer on the Louisville side now. But when I was a full-timer, when I was trying to break news, when I was writing features, when I was trying to find interesting things to write about, I was still writing and talking about a team in Louisville that, even in its worst year was a fringe NCAA tournament team with David Padgett and just missed out. Honestly, by 0.3 of a second, probably missed out on the NCAA tournament that year with that one Virginia loss. You talk about the Chris Mack first season; they were pretty firmly in the NCAA tournament before they struggled through February and ended up losing, I think, 13 or 14 games. I have never covered a bad Louisville team, and I'm curious. It's 2 years in a row now that Louisville has struggled. Last year, I thought was rock bottom for Louisville basketball, and here we are a year later, and now it's like, oh, this is potentially rock bottom. So I'm curious, as someone who has to find interesting things to, put together a 2-minute package, talk about, on the nightly news, talk about on your Twitter feed, just as coverage. How challenging has that been? And I guess, how have you found yourself trying to come up with some creative ways to think about what you're doing with this team? So it's not just bludgeoning people over the head with, hey, this team's really struggling.
It's really, really funny you ask that, Jeff, but most people would actually see it in a way that when teams are in these bad situations, it's more fascinating to cover, especially because of this Louisville team. Not like a knock, but they found many ways to lose this season. Different ways, 1-point game, blowout, we're leading late in the game, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always some unique angle. And even if they didn't win last night, the talk would be like, oh, where these 13 rebounds and 19 points from Jalen Withers came from. So there's always those little small tidbits that I've just gathered really each game from this team. So it hasn't been hard to cover them in that regard. Obviously, the on the court product, it's been tough, no question about it. Some few turnovers. I was just like, I didn't even see that like in my 9-year-old nephews in like basketball league, So there's been a lot of moments like that, but it hasn't been a huge challenge in regard of coming up with stories. Obviously, the viewer might not be interested in watching it, but it's just one of those unique things of following a journey of a team. It didn't matter if it's a Final Four team or a team that's at rock bottom. I'm just intrigued by watching the journey. You've watched Louisville in small glimpses improve. I mean, you got to tip the hat to them for winning last night.
Yeah. Hey,
you got to applaud them. I mean, they haven't quit. I know Louisville fans don't like moral victories, and quite frankly, they shouldn't have them. They're one of the 10 greatest programs of all time. But this is a low place, and they're still competing, and they were able to get an ACC victory. So that's kind of been my vantage point of this Louisville team. So they have been very intriguing, but they haven't been short of things to talk about, even during the rough stretches.
Yeah, no, I will speak to that too. I mean, I'll back you up on that. Like I found it more interesting when I was in Florida, helping out on the Marlins, for instance. Like they were really bad, but just trying to document, just the day-to-day and some of the emotion that goes with it, and the interesting people who are involved in trying to figure out ways to get away from from what's going on and improve and find ways to turn things around, or whatever those solutions are. It is, as much as fans probably are like, oh, that's, you're piling on. It's actually the opposite. We're trying to bring humanity to a situation that really, I sound old saying this, but in this day and age, the way things are now, it's very easy to feel like you're getting buried, and there's not a whole lot you can do to respond to it as it just keeps piling and piling and piling. So kudos to you for looking at it in that way, and trying to stay creative and stay engaged, as you said, in the subject without it being piling on. So let's talk about that. So first of all, I think Louisville actually put together a pretty good case here, that maybe they'll finish 14th in the ACC. You got to find something.
Yeah.
But Georgia Tech, man, yikes. That's my take on Georgia Tech. Yikes.
I mean, what they shoot like 29% for the game.
Ugh.
But what blew my mind, I looked at the stats at the end of the game. I was just like, it was an ugly game. And I still was just watching it, and I'm like, Louisville didn't do anything dramatically different from some of those games they lost. Granted, they had a few balls bounced their way, like the Kamari Lands prayer three. Like,
Yep.
That hasn't fallen this year. So, like, Louisville caught a break, like a shot that fall. Mike James stood up and hit three. Jalen Withers did. But if you told me Georgia Tech was going to have 5 turnovers for the entire game, Louisville was going to have 15, I would have been like, oh, Georgia Tech's probably winning by about 15 points, but they couldn't shoot at all. I mean, Louisville dominated the rebounding advantage. They shot the ball better. They both hit, I guess, like 7 or 8 threes. But it's really, it was shocking. And it's, I guess, ironic Louisville's last ACC win before last night came against Georgia Tech in Brooklyn in the conference tournament. And
yeah, there you go.
this year they win again. So I know people, luckily I don't have a Georgia Tech Twitter like Louisville Twitter, so I don't know what they're saying about Josh Patterson right now.
It's not going well. It's not going well down there. Well, speaking of that, that's a great point, because I think for a lot of people, you saw the numbers, and like you said, the turnovers were still around a quarter of their possessions. It wasn't an overwhelmingly good performance in a lot of ways. But what I would point to as maybe the difference maker, or one of the difference makers, how about Emmanuel Okorafor? I mean, yes. I like, look, and I've said this, like, you just don't know what you're getting with a guy like this. He comes in mid-season, coming from an up-and-coming development program in Africa. He's playing against some like grown men in that league. He's playing, as I said, he's playing against Anas Mahmoud and guys across the continent who are older and physical. So that's got to be a good experience. But you just truly, you don't know what you're getting. And for him to come in and in 2 games, look, he's not sitting there averaging 20 and 12, but the dude is providing energy. And even last night, I don't know if he scored, or he may have had like 2 or 4 points. Oh, he had the big dunk.
Yeah,
he had the big dunk. He had a couple of rebounds, but the biggest play for me was just chasing down loose balls,
yes,
and just playing with energy, getting his hands on deflections. I think he had a steal and a block. But it's just the little things. Those are the little things that Louisville just doesn't have. They've got their guys who can score for them. And L. Ellis and Mike James really are kind of the 2 guys. Jalen Withers can get hot, but they don't have a guy. I've used this phrase before, and it's my podcast, so I can say it. They need a motherfucker. Okay. They have said this every year for like 5 years now.
You do.
And they've had a couple of them over the course of their time, but like, you could go back the whole list, and maybe I'll tell Jack, our producer, to maybe blank that out. But I'll have him leave in mother so that people know exactly the phrase I use. But your team needs that. And he's not a guy who's like talking trash and like starting fights with people, but he is getting the loose balls, and he's doing things that help your team win games. They energize your team. They show the bench guys, hey, this is what you can do when you come in and impact a game. And above all else, it's just a nudge. Like, it's just a little nudge to just say, like, come on, we can do more. And you got to give the kid credit. He hasn't played a ton, but he has already had, I think, a nice impact on this group.
Absolutely, a big impact. The play of the game for me, it was a missed shot. JJ missed the shot. He jumped out and caught the ball out of bounds, threw it into Jalen Withers.
Yep.
Withers hit a three.
Yep.
Game changer. The crowd was in it. The energy was there. It was electric. Hustled down the court, was still rebounding. He had 2 points, 4 rebounds in 9 minutes.
That's great.
Nothing's earth shattering, but he defended. He brought energy. That dunk got the crowd into it. It sparked a run. So it's such a huge difference maker. He might not, like you said, come in off the bench, give you 12 points, 8 rebounds, 2 block shots, or something like that. It might be typically 2 points, 4 points, 6 points, and some boards. But to spark a run, like you said, that's just what it changes it. I'm not going to use the word you use because my mom might listen to this podcast. But yes,
if she's going to listen, well, I'm gonna have Jack blank it out. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble with Dom's mom. I don't.
I'm just kidding. She loves it. She's a fan. But no, it's true though. That's like one of those type of guys, and that was a dunk that was just like it was vicious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like Kenny Payne made the point. He said, "So what? He's gotten called for 2 moving screens in 2 days. It means he's being aggressive." Mm-hmm. So you take that, and I think a guy like him coming into practice that's going to bring that high motor. It shows guys like Sid Curry, Roosevelt Wheeler, Jalen Withers, all of these other guys that are playing the 4 and 5. If you don't, JJ Traynor as well. If you don't deliver, this kid's going to come in and take some of your minutes. And that's just like a difference maker. And it was a huge spark. So I was impressed with them. Not like he's still a raw product. He's got a lot of work to do. But just the fact that he can come in and contribute and be solid, that's what Louisville needs. Yeah. They don't need a bunch of guys to just do anything incredible. Just play solid. Like yesterday, Hersey Miller came in, gave Ellis a couple of minutes on the bench to catch his breath. And I don't even know Hersey's stats. I think I have somewhere close by, but like he didn't have any turnovers. He didn't do anything like bad. Mm-hmm. That's enough. Just defend and don't turn the ball over. Let Ellis catch his breath. If they can continually find guys to come in and give these reserves some breathers, they're going to be able, they'll be more fresh late in the game. So they were able to knock down some free throws and some just key shots. So Okorafor is one of those guys that could be a huge spark and just give some relief for the starters throughout the rest of this season. Don't know what that'll look like the rest of this season, but it's at least a bright spot in what's been a dark season.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you just need to find, like, I know people are a little frustrated with the idea that like it feels pretty solid that there's going to be a year or two of Kenny Payne. Like I know there's a lot of people who are just like, you got to rip the Band-Aid off and just deal with it. And I get that, but I think if you're Kenny Payne, if you're Josh Hurd, if you're anybody on the staff, anyone who listens to this podcast or reads my newsletter knows I've been very critical of them. But if they're going into the off season saying, hey, we're going to give this another go, we're going to try to turn things around, you need to find these things that you can say, okay, we may have to add, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys to this roster, but hey, we've got Caleb Glenn coming in. We've got Curtis Williams coming in. We've got this Okorafor kid who's here now and can help you as an energy guy. He may never be a starter for you, and maybe he will be, but in an 8 or 9 man rotation, he can give you 15 minutes of pure energy, and that stuff helps. Well, last thing then Dom, and I know we're always during the day I'm always trying to get people out in a half hour because everybody's crazy flying around. I hate to look too far ahead, and obviously I know there's still, if I do the math in my head right now, 3-19, at least 10 more games if you include the ACC tournament. So there's still a chunk of games left for Louisville. When you look at the offseason, when you look at the transfer portal, you look at March, early April, when all that movement kind of at least rises to the surface, because we all know they're already starting that process now and talking to AAU coaches and trainers and family members, et cetera. What is it as simple to you as like just redo the whole roster? I'm not quite there yet. I think it's probably there's like 4 or 5 guys you can say like, let's build around these guys and see if you can add a few pieces. But what would be maybe your top 2 things that you think Kenny Payne needs to go find in the offseason to really try to get Louisville I mean, it can't just be better. It's got to be a lot better next year.
Yes. First things first, get in that portal, find a point guard. I think as soon as you get that guard play, you keep building that up. That's going to be key and it's going to be crucial. But also, you mentioned, and I agree, there's a few guys that are on this roster right now, especially at this point in the year when you're getting towards the home stretch. You see where this season is 3-19. You don't see any miraculous runs happening. You don't see any NCAA tournaments. Those you see, like you can say, yeah, we're building these guys. We're getting these guys ready to take that next step. It hasn't been a pretty season, but when you looked at them at the end of the season, they were playing smarter. They were showing improvements, and they were building those guys. Emmanuel Okorafor, saying like, here's a nice little core group of young guys who I can work with for the next couple of years. And then, yes, go to the portal, get a solid point guard who can run and do what you want to do. And obviously, you can never go wrong with another good big. And I mean, there's plenty of, like you said, there's plenty of roster spots that could be open for Louisville basketball, and they'll need to fill them. So portal for sure. And then when Caleb Glenn comes in with some of these returning guys, you can build a nice little core group if they buy into what you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Even though this season hasn't been good, you have to, again, tip the cap. They are at least attempting to do what he wants to do, trying to move the ball around, trying to have motion offense, trying to defend. Like they're at least trying to do what he wants, at least from what he's told us, the type of teams he wants. They're at least attempting that. It just hasn't always been pretty. But show those young guys are grasping what you want to do, hit the portal, get some nice veteran point guards. And I think you can see some upside and some growth into year two. And I mean, he even made the joke himself. It can't get much worse than it was this year.
Yeah.
But I think that is a step in the right direction to continually build because it's not like hard. People say, you know, going through like turnover years, it's very possible to be very bad one year and really good the next. Mm-hmm. I mean, even like you saw how Pitt, they kind of got some things going. And Jeff Capel was on the hot seat. He hit the portal and he's had success. So you can immediately have success hitting that portal. I mean, Cal had a 9-win season one year. The next, he got back into the tournament because of portal guys. So it is definitely possible, and you can have some early success, but it's going to be up to Kenny Payne and this staff to hit the portal hard and get those type of guys to just get Louisville going in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, that's, I know we're probably both in the same category. Like the recruiting from a high school standpoint is concerning, considering what the chops were at Kentucky and even at Oregon before that years and years ago. But if you can get, like you said, if you can have some success in the portal, maybe you get a couple of guys who are decommitting from programs. You know, I would pay close attention to like Texas is an interesting situation. Certainly you see Notre Dame guys are decommitting with the news of Mike Bray retiring. So there's players out there who are now becoming available again. And you just look at if you can add a couple of guys in the portal and late commitments, then you put together a solid season. Then you can go out and start recruiting at a high level. Maybe that's the solution here, but there's a lot of things in there that are you're betting on them to happen, and they still need to happen especially after last spring. So
yeah, that's the key.
Discussion.
The key is for Kenny Payne. The way I view it, he has to get one guy to trust in him. Mm-hmm. That guy that is like really like that star type of player. Mm-hmm. It's like, why are you going to Louisville? It's because I trust in Kenny Payne and what he's going to do to show that glimpse. And then, you know, it's like for Louisville football. It took like Pierce Clarkson to trust in coming to Louisville. Then all those Cali kids came to join him. All of his friends, they want to play together. So sometimes it turns into like that snowball effect. Even, you know, for Kentucky's class, it took DJ Wagner, then Bradshaw, then, you know, Edwards. So that might be the key for Kenny, but he's got to get some stud, like you said, maybe a guy that's at Texas right now or at Notre Dame, or it might be from another school because, you know, coach might be getting fired at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. Just get one of those type of stud guys to believe in you. And it could be like just a huge bridge year to when you're trying to go into the house of a McDonald's All-American. Well, hey, this fifth-year Brad guy trusted in me, and we made the tournament. Imagine what I'll do with you type of player. You know, anything like that, just like that recruiting pitch. But It's going to be a very, very interesting offseason. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, it's a big mountain to climb. It's not a hill to climb. It's a mountain to climb for Louisville. But if he's your guy, if Kenny Payne is your guy, and you're sticking with him after this season, then you gotta work with him however possible to give him the resources and whatever he needs, as they have been, to see if they can build something in the offseason. Well, Dom, thank you so much for your time, man. This was good stuff. I love chatting with you as always. And I owe you a trip to Mama's. It's been too long since we went back and got some barbecue. So maybe sometime soon.
Man, I look forward to it. It's always a pleasure, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Dom.